Cari amici di Mystery Channel Show, benvenuti su Mystery Channel Show e benvenuto a Brian Forster. Hi Brian and welcome to Mystery Channel Show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks to you, but before to begin, I have one question. Chi è Brian Forster e di che cosa si occupa? Who is Brian Forster and what he does?
Well, I'm an American Canadian. I've lived in both countries. I became fascinated by ancient mysteries when I was very young, especially Egypt. And so about 8 years ago, I was able to do my first trip to Egypt, but I've been living in Peru for 13 years studying the ancient mysteries here as well, and have been all over the world, throughout South America and Europe and all over the place looking at ancient enigmatic sites.
Ma che cosa ti ha affascinato della teoria degli antichi astronauti? What fascinating you about the ancient astronaut theories?
Well, the strange thing is that these ancient megalithic sites, we don't know who made them. So when they say that the dynastic Egyptians built the Great Pyramid, that's clearly impossible. And the same with the sites in South America that supposedly the Inca did, that's impossible as well because they didn't have any technology. And what we see is very sophisticated technology had to have been used. So that's why I'm open to the idea of ancient aliens or whatever, because it is a possibility. If we can't figure out what human civilization did it, then we have to be open to the idea that it could have been extraterrestrials.
Quando tu hai fatto il primo viaggio in Egitto, quali sono state le sensazioni che tu hai avuto? When you did the first trip on Egypt, which were your feelings? When you saw all the pyramids and so on?
Well, what you obviously see is you see what the dynastic people could do. They worked in sandstone and limestone, which are quite soft materials, but they could not have done the work that was done out of granite and diorite and basalt because it's much, much harder than the tools they had at the time. So clearly you're looking at a pre-dynastic culture that did creations like the Serapeum boxes at Saqqara, the Great Pyramid because of its sheer size. And so, you know, it's either another human civilization that we have no other evidence of, or it could have been extraterrestrials who did it.
Ma cosa dice la scienza ufficiale riguardo a questi antichi manufatti? E qual è invece la tua visione poi della cosa, anche se già un pochettino l'hai detto? But which is the main scientific theory that we had, and which is your vision about this scientific theory that we have about these megalithic handcrafts?
Well, almost all academics are still stating that all of this work was done by the Egyptians or the Inca, for example, and they have no evidence of that. The difference that what we do is we bring in, we bring in geologists and engineers to look at these things, and none of them have stated that either the Inca or the dynastic Egyptians could have built these things. So that's, you know, that's the evidence. Slowly, academia is starting to open up, like younger archaeologists are starting to see the stuff that we're presenting and say, well, you have a very interesting story there, which they're very interested in being part of.
Secondo te questi oggetti, nello specifico dell'Egitto, furono costruiti da esseri umani che avevano delle tecnologie che non possediamo più, oppure addirittura furono costruiti da extraterrestri? In your opinion, the handcraft that you can find in Egypt, for example, they were built by humans with special technologies that we don't have anymore, or they were built by aliens or something else? What do you think about that?
I'm starting to look more and more at the possibility of it being alien, that they came, they constructed all of this stuff, and then they either left or they were destroyed by natural cataclysms that happened between about 12 and 13,000 years ago. I more strongly feel that they came, they constructed, and they took their technology with them, because their technology was more advanced than what we have in the 21st century. And people keep saying, well, where are the tools? It's like, well, we don't know. That's the hardest part. The tools are either hidden in the basements of museums or military bases, or they were taken off the planet.
Ma quando tu hai visitato le piramidi, le più famose, noi sappiamo che la teoria principale vuole che queste siano delle tombe dei faraoni. Che cosa sono secondo te in realtà? When you went to Egypt and visited the main pyramids that all we know, usually the main theory was that they are tombs of pharaohs. But which was the purpose, in your opinion, about the pyramids?
Well, that's the most interesting question. Of course, some of the pyramids were used as tombs by the dynastic people, but they found the pyramids there and they simply utilized them. The whole Giza Plateau underground is a series of tunnels and shafts, a very advanced network carved or cut into the bedrock. So, of course, the dynastic people would have used some of those shafts and underground rooms and things as tombs, but they didn't construct them, because we see the evidence of advanced technology in those places that had to have been done by machines and not by hand tools. Again, for most of the history of Egypt, they were a Bronze Age culture, and bronze is not a hard enough material to be able to cut into hard stone materials.
Secondo la visione degli archeologi egiziani, come furono costruite le piramidi e perché secondo te invece non è possibile che le piramidi furono costruite secondo i dettami che ci dice la scienza? In your opinion, which is the way through the ancient Egyptian built the ancient pyramids in base of the theory of the archaeologist, and how they do it for you?
Well, they simply couldn't have done it because they're too big. It doesn't matter how many people you have working on something like the Great Pyramid. You're looking at 2.5 million multi-ton blocks of limestone, and most of that material was not from the Giza area. It was actually from Cairo, so it all had to be transported across the Nile to get to Giza. And the basic theory is that the Great Pyramid itself was constructed over 20 years. So that means you would have to cut, move, and set into place one block every 2 minutes or less. And that is surely, it doesn't matter how many people you have working on it, that's impossible. So it had to have been done using possibly anti-gravity or something like that. And that would involve, again, either a very advanced civilization or an alien civilization.
Io ho potuto notare nel tuo canale che tu vai in varie parti del mondo mostrando quelle che sembrano appunto essere le opere megalitiche frutto di una tecnologia avanzata. Prima di entrare nel merito del Sud America, c'è secondo te diciamo, un elemento in comune tra queste costruzioni? In your channel I saw that you usually go around the world looking for these megalith places, megalith artifacts, and from the Egypt we can find videos about South America, for example. But which is the main element that they have in common?
Well, the main thing that they have in common is the scale, as in very large megalithic stones, and the incredible precision of how the stones fit together almost, not perfectly, but almost perfectly. As technologically advanced as you can see anywhere in the world. I don't think we're looking at one culture that did this. I think we're looking at least 3 or maybe 4. whoever was doing the work in Egypt was not the same as in South America, because in Egypt everything is very linear and straight, and in South America and other places it's more polygonal, like multiple facets, but interlocking almost perfectly. You know, I would say perfect, but it's you know, it's as technologically advanced as you can possibly imagine.
Ho appena visto il tuo ultimo video su una città del Sud America, ovviamente antica, e le mura di questa città sono a zigzag, non sono belle dritte. Perché secondo te le hanno costruite così? I just saw your last video a few minutes ago where you shows the walls of an ancient city in Peru, I think. And these walls are not just straight, they are zigzag. But usually we have this kind of walls where there are weapons that can take under siege another city. For example, wall against cannon are usually made like that. Why, in your opinion, they do something like that if they don't have officially any fire weapons at the day?
Well, I think that, for example, the zigzag wall, most archaeologists say the Inca built that and that it was done as a fortress. But again, because of the level of precision, with some stones being 120 tons, I think it had more to do with vibration and acoustics than as a fortress of some kind. Then the Inca moved into Cusco 1,000 years ago, and they found that giant wall there, and then they built on top of it in a less sophisticated way. That's the difference we see. You see the incredible precision of the first builders, and then relatively rough work done by the Inca. It's like night and day. And that's what becomes really obvious about this, is you see this pattern of what the Inca could have done, what the dynastic people could have done, and then what they couldn't have done.
Solitamente con il Sud America non si parla solo di costruzioni megalitiche, ma spesso, e tu stesso hai fatto, almeno così sembra, questo tipo di scoperta, si parla di crani allungati. Di che cosa si tratta? Usually South America is not just mentioned just for the megalithic cities, but even for the big skulls, long skulls that usually someone else found in this land. And I read somewhere that you discover something like that. What is the main argument that you can bring us about this story?
Well, again, most or almost actually all academics say that all of these skulls are the result of head binding of babies of nobility. And that is the case in a lot of different cultures. But then where I'm at, which is Paracas on the coast of Peru, the largest elongated skulls are found about a half-hour drive from where I'm sitting right now. And they have anatomical features which indicate that they were born with natural elongated heads. And again, academics are just disregarding that idea, but we've also done genetic testing that show that these oldest elongated skulls were not Native American people. You know, they were probably humanoid, but they weren't Homo sapiens sapiens. They were a subspecies of human.
Ma perché secondo te gli accademici davanti a questo tipo di prove cercano di negare l'evidenza? Why, in your opinion, the academic scholars try to hide this kind of evidences?
Because it doesn't fit in with their story, it doesn't fit in with their paradigm, it doesn't fit in with what they were educated about. But we've had at least 30, if not 40, medical professionals from around the world come and see these in person, and they can't explain them. You know, there's a suture that goes with us, a suture that goes this way, and that doesn't exist in the elongated skulls, the original ones. Also, the eye sockets are much bigger than normal. The foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull is 2.5 centimeters back from where it should be. So we're talking about genetic differences, not the reshaping of a baby's head.
Ma sono state fatte delle analisi del DNA su questi teschi oppure no? Did you do or someone else does some DNA proof on these skulls or not?
Yes, we analyzed samples from 20 different elongated skulls, and only 2 of them turned out to have maternal Native American DNA. All of the others are related to elongated skulls found in Eurasia, like around the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So that's the difference. Over the original elongated skulls were not Homo sapiens sapiens, but they were close enough to be able to breed with normal people, and that's why over the course of centuries, the head binding began. That was a way to maintain the look of the elongated head.
Ma questo, diciamo, questo fattore, questo avere il cranio allungato, era secondo te, diciamo, un'eredità, anche un'eredità genetica o era anche per somigliare ipoteticamente agli alieni che li avevano creati? In your opinion, these elongated skulls were an heritage of an alien dynasty, or they do have this characteristic because they belong from them?
Well, that we still don't know. You know, what we're hoping to do more DNA analysis, but so far what we found is that they did not originate on the coast of Peru. So they're not directly related to Homo sapiens sapiens as we know who we are, and whether or not they're descended from aliens or not it's a possibility, but we simply don't know. Or maybe they were genetically engineered by off-world beings of some kind. That's, you know, it's an ongoing study that I'm doing.
Ma secondo te l'essere umano di oggi è il frutto di un'ibridazione oppure l'uomo, secondo te, sul pianeta poi si è sviluppato per i fatti suoi? In your opinion, the humans of today are a kind of experiment from the aliens, or we are just another thing?
Well, I don't know. My background is in biology, so I studied Darwinian evolution, of course.
Me too.
And and there are, you know, it's called the theory of evolution because that's what it is. It hasn't been proven to be the case. I don't believe that we were descended from apes at all, because we're so vastly superior in terms of intellect and capability as compared to any other life form on this planet. So it is possible that our ancestors were genetically engineered by someone. You know, I'm open to that idea.
Everyone knows that in Egypt, the ancient Egyptian could use for this kind of works horse, cows, charts with wheels, because the wheels were invented in the past times in this zone of the world. But the same thing doesn't happen in the South America. How the archaeologists explain how the Incas or other civilization that lives in South America built all these big cities and these big monuments?
Well, the problem is they can't. Again, they don't do interdisciplinary studies, so they don't bring in geologists and engineers and people to try to come up with concepts of how this could have been done, and the ideas that they do come up with themselves are usually quite ridiculous. So they simply say it took a lot of people to do it, they had to be coordinated, but it's simply impossible. Again, you're looking at the Inca were a Bronze Age culture. That's as advanced as they got. They had no concept of iron or steel or any harder materials. So their theories simply fall apart. That's what's the great thing about coming to these locations and looking at them yourself. We haven't had one person out of thousands that we've taken on tour who could explain how the Inca could have done this. So gradually we're winning the argument because the academic opposition have no argument.
Una cosa che mi fa, cioè, spesso mi fa pensare è, loro sapevano utilizzare e forgiare l'oro, ma non sapevano costruire armi di bronzo o di metallo. Come te lo spieghi? One of the most question that I always makes to myself is they were very able to work the gold, makes jewels, for example, but they weren't able to build weapons of steel or bronze. They use baseball bat usually for fighting, no? And how could you explain this?
Well, they did out of bronze. Bronze, the dynastic people were quite capable of producing bronze weapons and bronze tools, but bronze is too soft to cut stone like granite. You simply, it doesn't matter how many times you hit that stone with a granite chisel, it doesn't damage or even, it doesn't remove material because it's too soft. Around, I think, 700 BC, the Assyrians, who knew how to work with steel, moved into Egypt, and they were able to introduce steel tools at that time. But conventional story is that the Great Pyramid was constructed 4,500 years ago, and at that time, the dynastic people were Bronze Age up until about 700 BC. So why they didn't think about it, I have honestly no idea, but they didn't. We have no evidence of any iron, except some meteorite tools, but very limited in terms of how many were. But, I don't think that many meteorites have landed in Egypt over the course of time.
Ma perché secondo te questi antichi astronauti si sarebbero concentrati di più in una zona come l'Egitto, possibilmente anche l'Iraq e l'Iran, la Mesopotamia e il Sud America? Why, in your opinion, these ancient visitors were focused on Egypt, Mesopotamia and South America?
Because I think they found relatively advanced societies. I mean, the Inca were very socially advanced. The dynastic Egyptians were very socially advanced. So were the Sumerians. So I think it makes sense that if these were extraterrestrials coming to the planet, they would want to develop a relationship with cultures rather than Stone Age people or little groups living in a jungle or something. I think that would be the attraction to them, of seeing an advanced human culture that didn't have technology but did have very good social structure, that they would want to interact with them.
Secondo te, quale sarebbe stato l'obiettivo di costruire queste città megalitiche per l'essere, cioè perché avrebbero dovuto farle per l'essere umano? Oppure erano cose costruite per loro, perché ci vivevano loro? E per quale motivo, secondo te? These big cities were built for themselves or for the humans? And why they feel the necessity to stay in the earth, in your opinion?
Well, that's a great question to which I honestly have no answer. But I think they constructed these things for their own purpose, and then they simply were either wiped out by a cataclysm, or they left and they simply abandoned these projects, and they were then inherited by the cultures that came after them for very different purposes. Of course, most of the megalithic sites we talk about as being temples of some kind for spiritual purposes, but I think the original function was more pragmatic, that they were used as energetic vibrational structures, and they were utilizing the energies of the earth and focusing that energy for some reason. But then when they left and after the cataclysms happened, then these sites lost most of the energy concentrating abilities.
Ma durante le tue ricerche, i tuoi studi, i tuoi viaggi, hai mai conosciuto qualche accademico che comunque sia segretamente ti diceva che la pensava come te? During your travels around the world, have you ever come across some scholar or an academic that secretly talking with you tells you, I think the same thing that you think?
Yeah, I have. Luckily, in March, when we were in Egypt, our guide, who was an Egyptologist, he said, I know all of that is true. Everything you say is true. There was a very advanced civilization that existed in pre-dynastic times, but he's not allowed to say that in public because he could lose his career. But he said it to me, and I think over the course of time there will be more of them who will open up to that and start expressing that statement, because it makes Egypt's history far more fascinating. The same thing in Peru. A very good friend of mine is a PhD anthropologist, and he knows that the city of Cusco is tens of thousands of years old, not just 1,000 years, and that there are a lot of structures that were built underground in Peru and Egypt. So he's someone we utilize every time we do a tour, because he's an academic who's Peruvian, who understands that the history of Peru is far more complex and older than what other academics state.
Ma solitamente in questi posti, per esempio prendiamo il Perù, gli indigeni hanno delle leggende che parlano di popoli venuti dalle stelle. Ne sai qualcuno nello specifico che avalla la tesi che tu porti avanti? Usually the people from South America, for example, in this case we are talking about Peru, the people that lives in the jungle, or the Indians in general, bring some stories from their creators, no? And usually these creators became from the stars, from the space. Do you know some of this legend that someone else tells to you, and this legend is related with all these things that we are talking about?
Very much so. Again, I have a number of very intelligent native friends of mine who live in Peru, especially around Cusco, and they know of the deep history through the oral traditions of the country. For example, the name Peru, almost no one knows where that word comes from. Ecuador comes from the fact that it's on the equator. Venezuela means Little Venice, but Peru, you ask people, and Bolivia is named after Simón de Bolívar. But if you ask a Peruvian, where does the name Peru come from? They don't know. But according to my local experts, they say there was an ancient civilization called the Pirwas, or the Pirwa, and that the land that they lived in was called Peru. So that's where that name comes from. And then also, they and others talk about an ancient race of people or beings that came to this area in the very distant past, before the Inca times, called the Wiracocha or the Viracocha. And they were supposedly very advanced. They were the great teachers. They came, they taught, and then they left.
And if I'm not wrong, they were with the white skin.
Yeah, they're described as being light. I wouldn't say white, but I would say light-skinned, because Native Americans tend to be very dark-skinned with black hair. And these people are spoken of as being much taller than normal, with skin much lighter than normal, and possibly red or even blonde hair. So that indicates obviously that they weren't Native American.
But if I don't remember bad, in Mexico we have another divinity. The name is Quetzalcoatl. Is a man with a beard, for example, no? Just like me. And they don't have any hairs in the face.
Yeah, that's the Wiracochana are described as being the same, that they were noticeably that they had a lot of facial hair. And then, as you said, Quetzalcoatl and also Kukulkan. You know, they were all described as what's called the feathered serpent.
Sì.
And I wrote a book about that because I think that the Wiracocha, Quetzalcoatl, and others were actually the same people, that they traveled, they began their travels in Peru, then they traveled north into the Yucatan area, and then up into the Mexico City area. And that's, you know, they were the great influencers. They were the ones who brought knowledge of science and advanced agriculture to all of these different cultures. Because I don't think they just, that these things simply organically developed. I think you needed that to be introduced into a society in order to speed up their development.
Ma secondo questo principio, secondo te le religioni, come per esempio il cristianesimo ed altre, sono nate da un contatto primordiale che l'uomo ha avuto con questi esseri? In your opinion, our religions, for example, Christianity and so on, were born from this original contact that the humans had with these beings or not?
It's possible. I mean, the Sumerian society, which is one of the oldest that we know of, again, they were very advanced. They understood astronomy and advanced agriculture and all sorts of things that I don't think just organically developed there. So I think that had to have been introduced. And supposedly, some of the Sumerian stories could have been adopted by, you know, Judaism and Christianity, because you have the concept of the Virgin Mother back in the Sumerian times that could have been adopted by the, you know, of that. And it could, again, go very much farther back in time than even the Sumerians in terms of first contact. That's why we're looking at these megalithic structures as being at least 13,000 years old, which is twice as old as the Sumerians.
Il sito megalitico oltre l'Egitto che ti ha colpito di più e perché? Which is the most impressive megalithic site that you visited and why this place was special for you?
Well, there are different sites depending upon the location. So the Great Pyramids in Egypt are, of course, huge, like they're 500 feet tall. And when you're physically there, then you see how difficult it would be to make something like, you know, if you see a picture or a film of something like that, you go, well, that looks, you know, very complicated. But when you're standing there and you feel like an ant compared to this giant structure, then you're blown away. And the other strange thing is, why was it early on in the dynastic Egyptian culture that they built these giant pyramids and then went downhill in terms of their capability? It just doesn't make any sense. There's also a tunnel system in Egypt called the Serapeum, where you have 25 boxes that weigh up to 100 tons apiece made out of granite. And the granite was brought from Aswan, which is at the very southern end of Egypt. So that's 500 miles or 800 kilometers in terms of transportation. You know, no clue as to how they could have cut the box itself from the bedrock, how they could have transported them, and then how they could have shaped them with almost laser accuracy. And in Peru, well, actually, Petra in Jordan is another example. It's a monumental construction. Everyone's heard of Petra because it was in Indiana Jones, but it's a complex that's 12 kilometers long. It's not simply the little you know, structure that you see in the Indiana Jones film. That's less than 1% of it. There are chambers at Petra that are 300,000 cubic feet in size, cut into the bedrock. You know, how is that possible with you know, with bronze tools or iron tools or steel tools? It's simply impossible. Peru, there are many locations. I would say Sacsayhuaman, which is what my latest video is, that I did. You know, again, it's the sense of scale. You're looking at stones up to 125 tons.
Ma oltre ad essere, diciamo così, un documentarista di questo tipo di argomenti, io so che sei anche uno scrittore. Come nasce la necessità di scrivere questi libri e di che cosa parlano? Over to be a documentarist, I know that you are even a writer, and you wrote several books bended to this argument. How was born the necessity to write about these things, and what your books talks about?
Okay, I've written 37 books, and on subjects like, I've written 2 about Easter Island, I've written 3 or 4 about Egypt, many about Peru, a few about Bolivia, and other, Petra in Jordan, Baalbek in Lebanon. You know, all of the megalithic sites that I've been to, I've written at least one book about. And I started out simply because I was interested in the subject matter, and you can't find any books by academics that touch this subject whatsoever. So I felt impelled to document this information in a format that would be relatively easy for people to read, with lots of photographic, you know, I'm very big on photos because I think photographic evidence is the biggest thing. So that's more or less how it started.
Hai citato Baalbek in Libano. Secondo te, perché venivano costruiti gli obelischi e a cosa servivano? You mentioned the Belbek Megalith in Lebanon. Why, in your opinion, this, I don't know the name in English, these megaliths were built, and which was the purpose of these objects?
Well, Baalbek's really fascinating because we see evidence of 3 different timelines, 3 different levels of construction. So the most recent work was done during the Middle Ages, during the time of the Templars entering into that part of the world to conquer, and before, and then the prior civilization was the Romans. When the Romans expanded into Lebanon, they built some large structures, but then the foundation blocks are megalithic. We're talking 400-ton blocks, 800-ton blocks. Again, unfortunately, the standard story is that all the initial work was done by the Romans, but it's on a scale that's, you know, that is impossible. And when you ask, well, why would they build something of that incredible size in such a faraway land and not in Rome, for example, they say, well, they wanted to impress the local people with their capability. It's like, no, that doesn't work. So again, the more you visit these places, the more you see that the evidence is very obvious of incredibly advanced civilizations showing up in the beginning, and then cultures that we know of moving in and taking over. So yeah, the Romans came. They found this giant foundation, and so they used the foundation to build on top of. And then during the Middle Ages, you see much rougher construction built on top and reconstruction built on top. So it's the same. We find the same thing everywhere we go. You see the capabilities of the cultures we know of, and then you see other work that they couldn't have done.
Secondo te, questo contatto che c'è stato tra gli uomini e questi esseri ci sarà nuovamente nel futuro, oppure quella che era la loro missione si è esaurita? In your opinion, this original contact that there was in the past, there will be in the future, or they've just ended their mission in our Earth?
No, I think there is a lot of contact going on. I've had many UFO sightings myself that I can't explain. I can't explain them as being anything that we know of. Like it had to be incredibly advanced technology. So I think we're being monitored by different extraterrestrial cultures, but they're not allowed to interfere with our development. But occasionally they will show up simply because, I think, out of curiosity, or some people like me are quite sensitive, and so I'm able to open up my ability to see things that most people wouldn't see. That's the best explanation that I can give. But especially since the invention of cell phones, now everybody has a video camera as they walk around, and that's why you have so many more sightings happening, because people can, take their phone out of their pocket and film something as soon as they see it.
Brian, io non ho altre domande, io ti ringrazio per essere stato nostro ospite, mi auguro che ci possano essere altri incontri e per oggi è tutto, un saluto. Brian, I don't have any other question for today. I hope that we will have some other interview together, and thanks so much for your time and your interview.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you very much, and I look forward to future interactions with you.
Thanks a lot.